Here is Sailor Studio 752, a purple ink. Let's jump straight to the end with my opinion on this ink. A very dark purple that is beautiful on the page and feels substantial under the nib. Like you can feel it as if it's a thicker ink. It's really pleasurable to write with. This has almost no tone variation as the paper changes, and there is a minimal amount of shading that does occur. Now, on non-fountain pen friendly paper, it performs well and keeps its beautiful look. While there are a bunch of flops in the Studio line, this one is a real winner, especially for those that like those very dark purples. The pen for today is a Pelikan M800. Now that we know my opinion on this ink, let's see how I got there with the first writing sample done on Clairfontaine. Take a look at how beautiful this comes out on the Clairfontaine paper, as it has no feather, no spread, and almost nothing for shading. I say almost nothing for shading because I can find a few areas that it does get a little bit lighter, like Friend on the second line, where the F is quite a bit darker than the IE that lightened up. That N was, or that E, or that RI lightened up quite a bit. The EN got just a tad bit darker, and that D at the end got quite a bit darker again. But mostly what we have is that very dark purple looking amazing. Looking at the back of the page between these fingers, no bleeding and no ghosting. Let's take a look at some other inks from the same manufacturer. Here is Sailor Gentle Apricot. Here is Sailor Gentle Black. Here is Sailor Gentle Blue Black. Here is Sailor Gentle Blue. The next writing sample is done in a Portage reporter's notebook. On the Portage paper, we get a tone that is even darker than we had on the Clairfontaine, almost to the point of feeling like it could pass as a black ink. Now, it doesn't feather. I said, yep. I said black because I got myself confused. Because it's a purple, almost as a black ink, and I had to double check myself. Funny, almost as a black ink, it doesn't feather, doesn't spread, it doesn't shade, it does look beautiful. Great lines the whole way. Although, it came across as a black to me, and I know what it is that I'm looking at on it. Pretty neat in what happens, really. Looking at the back of the page between these two fingers, we see that it does get quite deep into the paper. I don't know that you could write back here and comfortably read both sides, but nothing bled through touching the page underneath. There's a lot to learn by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is immediately put into water for 10 to 15 seconds. The one on the right, marked with a D, is let dry for 10 minutes before putting into water. The next writing sample is done on a national brand Steno notebook. On the national paper, it is a bit darker than it was even with that Portage paper. Quite a bit darker than it was coming through with the Clairfontaine. It is such a super dark purple, but it somehow manages to just hold on to that purpliness about it. It doesn't quite make me say black, but boy, it is close. It doesn't feather, it doesn't spread, it doesn't shade. It is absolutely enjoyable to use and very nice to look at. Looking at the back of the page between these two wiggling fingers, it doesn't bleed, it doesn't ghost. It is outstanding because you could continue your notes back here. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. The smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. The highlighter is on the top left, pen flush is on the top right, 1/3 bleach solution is on the bottom left, and water is on the bottom right. The next writing sample is done in a Rhodia notebook. You know, we look at this paper to see how it stands out from that quad rule, and it stands out with no problems whatsoever. It doesn't bleed, doesn't ghost, looks the same tone, doesn't bleed or ghost. I'm ahead of myself. Spoiler, I've seen the back of the page. It doesn't feather or spread. It does keep that very dark purple tone, same tone as the Clairfontaine. No shading at all, though we did see a little bit on the Clairfontaine, none of it happening here. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding, no ghosting. It's between these wiggling fingers. It's an outstanding performance. With over 1,000 inks reviewed, let's take a look at some color comparables. Here is Diatramentis Purple Violet. Here is Diamine Amazing Amethyst. Here is Geherban Larmes de Cassis. Here is Kaweco Summer Purple. The next writing sample is done in a composition lab notebook. As a tone, what we're getting with this lab notebook is a little bit flatter, a little bit lighter than we had on the Clairfontaine. Now, it doesn't feather and it doesn't spread. It doesn't shade at all. I am seeing it come through as more of a purple, or the purple is coming through more pronounced, like when we take a look at Thrains on the third line, where the T shows nice mid and dark tones. Same with that H, nice mid tone at the top, very dark at the bottom, lightening up to the RAIN, very dark with the S at the end. Looking at the back of the page, between the wiggling fingers, we get no bleeding and no ghosting. While it's nice to see ink in the same color family, I prefer to see ink to complement the color on the page. Here is Noodler's Sequoia. Here is Birmingham Pen Company Jeff Goldblum Independence Gray. Here is Zenzoi Sweet Pink. Here is Sailor Studio number 670. The last writing sample is done on 20-pound copy paper. The copy paper really did lighten this up as a tone, really making it a bit more purple than we had on the Clairfontaine. Now, there is a little bit of feather and there is a little bit of spread, though I see both of them at the manageable level that if you wanted to use this, I think Sailor's doing a pretty good job when it comes to writing on cheaper paper. It's not shading, and we shouldn't expect it here. Looking at the page underneath, I had 3 little spots where it did dot the page underneath. You probably wouldn't have a problem with it if I didn't circle it. Not such a big deal. Between the wiggling fingers, we see that the ink does get quite deep into the paper, meaning you couldn't write on the back of the page without destroying both sets of notes, but nothing except those 3 dots. I messed up. There was a little bit of habit there. It did bleed through touching the page underneath, which could be the deal breaker for you. So what nib and pen do I think are going to give the best writing experience with this ink? I think a dry, fine, or medium will lighten the tone and I believe give a decent amount of shading, a bit more than we've really seen. Now, I'm really enjoying this as its darkest tone, so I would say go with a wet pen of really any nib size to deliver on a beautiful dark purple with a tiny hint of shading to every now and then distract you from how beautiful it is on the paper. I hope you got something out of this video, and thanks for watching. I want to let you know that the best way you can support this or any channel is to let retailers know where you heard of something if you go to buy.